Does no one ride anyone else in Helldivers?
Hello, fellow netizens, and welcome to Scandalous Games, the show where we take a closer look at video game-related controversies. I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and I do the research and share a story of a video game-related controversy to my friends.
I'm Phil, and you might as well consider me a video game newbie.
I'm Elford. I'm a video game aficionado.
I'm Kate, and I have never played Helldivers, but sounds like I should.
All right, folks, thanks for tuning in. As always, in this episode, we'll be finally wrapping up our look back at the year of controversies that was 2024. So last time we talked a bit about some controversies that were going on in the Helldivers 2 community, talking about, for example, the backlash over Sony's attempt to force non-PlayStation players to create a PSN account to link to play Helldivers 2, which resulted in a precision review bombing that eventually got Sony to change its mind. We also talked about the escalation of freedom expansion and backlashes, particularly regarding how different weapons work. And then we segued into a slightly different topic, talking about Luigi Mangione, who is currently in custody, held as a suspect in the December 4th, 2024 killing of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. And we talked a little bit about the conversations over healthcare that sparked, and also the really strange video game connection with one writer attempting to try to create a link between Among Us and Luigi Mangione's alleged role in the shooting. However, this was not the only video game connection in this case. With the apparent identity of Thompson's killer revealed, as is the internet's way, people scoured any and all online materials that may have been connected to Mangione in an effort to piece together what might have inspired him to 3D print a gun and assassinate an insurance executive in the streets, besides, I suppose, the obvious reasons. And this quest for meaning uncovered other gaming connections. For example, folks quickly found his LinkedIn, where he listed that he had worked as a UI programming intern at Firaxis, where he did debugging work on Civilization 6 between May 2016 and August 2017. So he actually did work in the industry. Social media scouring also inevitably led people to what appeared to be his Twitter/X profile, which I'm going to show you all right now. Let's see if it still works. Yeah, it's still up there. So yeah, particularly his banner, which I have right up here. Because when people found what appears to be his Twitter profile, he had uploaded a banner containing 3 images: an x-ray of a spine with several pins in it, presumably a personal x-ray, a photo of Mangione shirtless on a mountain, and an image of the Pokemon Breloom.
We don't have to put this in the episode because it shouldn't just be me quoting a bunch of people on the internet who are funnier than me, but after this picture, I read somewhere online, someone said, Ryan Murphy's phone has to be ringing off the hook after they found out that the killer had abs.
So yeah, anyone here familiar with Breloom? I wish Andy was on this one.
Oh yeah, he would have a really long explanation for who this is. Kevin, I think you're going to have to educate all of us.
All right, so for the uninitiated, Breloom is a grass fighting type Pokemon introduced during Generation 3. That's Pokemon Ruby, Pokemon Sapphire, Pokemon Emerald. It evolves from the grass type Shroomish, which evolves into Breloom at level 23, and its Pokedex entries from that generation describe it as a Pokemon that spreads toxic spores with its tail and fights using fast movements and punches from its stretchy arms, displaying moves that put even human boxers to shame. It also, according to one Pokedex entry, quote, loves warm and humid climates and feeds on trees and plants in fields and forests. This surprising inclusion in Mangione's online lore raised some questions about what the mushroom Pokemon might have meant for him. As of this recording, he has made no statement on the issue, leading to one of the internet's favorite pastimes: wild speculation. Online sleuths quickly zeroed in on the number 286, which is Breloom's number in the National Pokedex, prompting all sorts of theories about a possible numerical connection to Breloom. For example, one popular early theory was that the 286 was a reference to the Old Testament's Book of Proverbs, chapter 28, verse 6. It goes by several different translations, depending on your preferred Bible edition, including, quote, better is a poor man who walks in his integrity than a rich man who is crooked in his ways, end quote. And, quote, better the poor whose walk is blameless than the rich whose ways are perverse, end quote. Now, of course, this reading involves ignoring all the other books in the Bible with at least 28 chapters. For example, Genesis 28:6. Quote, when Esau, and these are all from the King James Bible translation, Genesis 28:6, quote, when Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Padanaram, let me try it, Padanaram, as you can see, I'm not a biblical scholar, Padanaram, to take from him a wife from thence, and that as he blessed him, he gave him a charge, saying, thou shalt not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan, end quote. Or Psalms 28:6, Quote, "Blessed be the Lord, because he hath heard the voice of my supplications," end quote. Or Matthew 28:6, quote, "He is not here, for he is risen, and as he said, come see the place where the Lord lay," end quote. So 286, and possibly a biblical reference. What do we think about that?
I have no words.
I mean, I just hope nobody pulled anything with that reach.
If you think that was a stretch, ooh, here we go. This gets weirder. This 286 gets weirder. This one not necessarily a big of a stretch, but here we go. Others suggested, if it's not a biblical reference, it might be referring to an insurance claim denial code, because there is a 286 denial code in insurance policy. It denies a claim if the appeal time has not been met. So I'm not an insurance expert, so here is how a December the 10th, 2024 Newsweek article on the alleged Pokemon connection explained a 286 denial code. Quote, "Denial code 286 is applied when a healthcare claim is denied due to not meeting the appeal time limits. This indicates that the healthcare provider or billing entity failed to submit an appeal within the designated time frame after receiving the claim denial. As a result, the claim is rejected for not adhering to the required appeal deadline," end quote. So that it might have been some kind of oblique reference to maybe being denied coverage in some way, as maybe denied as a claim code 286 might be the connection. There's reason to believe that Luigi Mangione dealt with a lot of chronic pain, particularly chronic back pain. Again, referring back to that x-ray. I've also seen some even wilder iterations of this that rapidly veer into QAnon-style conspiracy territory. For example, on December the 10th, a Reddit user posted on the White People Twitter subreddit claiming Mangione was obsessed with the number 286, in a manner similar to that of Jim Carrey in the movie The Number 23, asserting that the number appeared in all sorts of places on Mangione's online presence, such as that he had 286 posts on Twitter, and even at the McDonald's where authorities apprehended him was 286 miles away from the scene of the crime. As an aside, it isn't, unless you take a really roundabout way to get to Altoona from New York.
He was just out doing donuts in the parking lot trying to get up to 286 miles before we go inside.
He drove 286 miles an hour down I-95 to get there. This thread, I found this on the 10th of December, and then it very quickly got taken down. A bunch of people started responding back to this, that this is nuts. The kinds of assertions the person was making about the number 286 with Luigi Mangione. Some of them weren't even correct, like the distance between where the shooting happened in Manhattan and the McDonald's. And the subreddit's mods took down the post. You can still see the comments, but you can't see the post anymore. Unfortunately, it wasn't saved by the Internet Archive, but I do remember reading this. It was wild, and people were pointing out this is QAnon shit, the kinds of connections here. As for Breloom's role in all of this, until Mangione makes a statement on the matter, we may never know. As one report I came across speculated, maybe Luigi was just into shrooms. In the meantime, some people have committed to making Breloom-themed fan art, recontextualizing the mushroom Pokemon, much as some sections of the internet have done to Mangione himself, as a hero of the masses. So there are like tribute fan art to Breloom.
Are you going to show us some?
Oh, I wasn't good. If I could look for some. Hold on, one sec. All right, so this is on Know Your Meme. They have a couple of them. So, for example, here is a fan drawing that dropped on Twitter of Breloom. It looks like he's throwing out like seeds, and they say "deny, defend, depose," which was etched onto the bullets that were found at the shooting. And another one from Twitter, the post is a United CEO shooter lore just dropped, and it shows a picture of Breloom on TV saying these are horrible, horrible people. And on the right is a guy with a red hat, like a MAGA, holding an assault rifle. It says, "I'll handle them, Mr. President." So, yeah, according to Know Your Meme, that one received over 17,000 views and 1,000 likes in a day. So yeah, Pokemon and Luigi Mangione. All right, I got one more. All right, here's our last one. And this one's semi-related, so we're not quite leaving the realm of Pokemon. Speaking of Pokemon, our final topic for our rundown of 2024 controversies is a section I'm calling Nintendo bullshit. So let's take a little bit of what Nintendo was up to this past year. There was plenty I could have picked related to the Big N. However, I decided to settle on two Pokemon-related scandals that attracted my attention last year. The first one we'll cover involves a game that, while not created by Nintendo or Game Freak, one could argue might be at least Pokemon adjacent, and that game is Palworld. Anybody here heard of Palworld?
I remember when it was being hyped for release. I haven't looked much into it since. Palworld is a game where they have Pokemon-like looking characters that you can recruit into, I think, it's like a Minecraft sort of thing where you can build your own village and things are going to attack it, and you can use your pals to defend that and go exploring. And the big thing they were advertising at the time was like they could use weapons, like Pikachu with a machine gun. Looked pretty cool.
Yeah, thanks, Alfred. I'm going to show you a little bit of this game in a moment. So yeah, Palworld is an open-world survival game developed by Pocket Pair and released in early access for Xbox and PC on January the 19th, 2024. Players assume the role of a gun-toting adventurer who explores the Palpagos Islands, a land occupied by creatures called Pals, whom players can capture with special devices called Pal Spheres. Once acquired, players can raise their pals and take them on all sorts of exciting adventures, such as traversing the world, battling other pals, arming them with machine guns and rocket launchers, exploring dungeons, challenging bosses, or toiling in work camps and factories. The game went viral after its initial trailer release on May the 24th, 2022, and I'm going to show you that right now so you can get a sense of what it looked like. So yeah, that version we're watching right now is the official trailer was put on IGN, and it has over 2 million views as of this recording.
It looks really cute.
It reminds me a little bit of Monster Hunter.
It does a little bit of that vibe, doesn't it? My favorite part's where you get to, play with the pals and then put them in your work camps. We saw a bunch of adorable creatures assembling assault rifles and being locked up in what appeared to be a lab for experiments. And that one where they were tossing grenades into a corridor and blowing them up. So yeah, it's a land of contrast, Palworld.
So what was the controversy angle? Did people react badly to the AK-47 factory?
I'm glad you asked about this. It wasn't necessarily about the game's content. It was that the game looked like Pokemon. People looked at this and the game's colorful monsters and capture mechanics quickly drew comparisons to Pokemon, with footage of pals sporting heavy ordnance earning Palworld the unofficial nickname Pokemon with Guns. Following its early access launch, Palworld became an overnight success, with Pocket Pair boasting on their company Twitter on January 24th that the game had sold over 9 million copies in less than a week. A day later, it attracted over 2 million concurrent users on Steam, giving it the second highest concurrent user base behind only PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. So, it became one of the biggest games on Steam behind PUBG. This is where the controversy now comes in. The rapid success combined with the game's viral attention then got people in the game community wondering how Nintendo would respond to the alleged Pokemon with guns. And if we remember our previous episodes on Pokemon fan projects, we have a sense of how Nintendo responds to these kinds of projects, the ones that seem to look like their games, particularly when it comes to games that actually use their intellectual property. We saw Pokemon Uranium and getting cease and desist letters from Nintendo. And we also know that, companies that have, for example, supported what we consider cheat devices or lockout chips, getting faced with heavy legal, civil, and criminal penalties at the behest of Nintendo. Nintendo is a behemoth that will burn your house down if they feel like they have the legal right to do so. And I mean, by all outward appearances, Palworld looks essentially like Pokemon, albeit with the darker implications of capturing monsters so they fight for our amusement, more prominently featured. And some of the pals look a bit like existing Pokemon. So that was largely what the big controversy was of this game. It was basically people just kind of sitting on the side, hey, Nintendo, what are you going to do about this? And not long after the game entered early access, the Pokémon Company, which manages the Pokemon brand, put out a statement that the company planned, quote, to investigate and take appropriate measures to address any acts that infringe on intellectual property rights related to the Pokemon, end quote. This was a potentially ominous statement going back to our previous episode. As we learned when we covered Pokemon fan projects a while back, Nintendo has a history of aggressively defending their IP rights against infringement, even to the point of forcing the PR rep for a Switch modding device to pay them garnished wages for the rest of their natural life. And for more on Gary Bowser, check out our previous series on Pokemon fan projects. And as is the case of Gary Bowser, while Nintendo doesn't go after every perceived misuse of their brands, they tend to throw everything in their legal arsenal against individuals or teams developing projects that get a lot of attention to send a very clear message that if you fuck with Nintendo IP, then Nintendo will fuck with you. Thus, many in the gaming community waited to see if Nintendo was going to sweep in and Oko Palworld with their super effective lawyers. So what do we think about this?
So when I initially saw the first advertisements for Palworld, in my view, it looked very similar to Pokemon. So it wouldn't even seem to me to be outside of sensical for Nintendo want to really deeply investigate whether or not they've used any of the likenesses of their characters here. So,
I mean, it does kind of look like a ripoff of multiple things. A little bit of Pokemon, a little bit of Monster Hunter World, and maybe something else I don't even know about.
Yeah, I have not played Palworld. It looks like it's cobbled together from a number of different game ideas. capture and battling mechanics from Pokemon. It looks very Fortnite inspired in terms of its visuals, in terms of particularly the way the main character, your player character moves around, the way they shoot. It's got that open world. I do get some Monster Hunter vibes from it for that. It appears to have elements of like crafting and some kind of resource management or mining. So it's a little bit of Minecraft or Minecraft adjacent games. So again, it seems to me like it's borrowing a lot from a lot of different games. It's also like, I'm not a lawyer. By any stretch of the imagination am I a lawyer, but also the tricky thing about this seems to me that like Nintendo tends to go at people that they feel are directly, when it comes to copyright infringement, when it comes to, for example, like DMCA takedowns or cease and desist orders, they usually go for people who are in some ways directly involved with their IP. For example, a website hosting ROMs of Nintendo games. If somewhere where you can download a ROM of like Pokemon Ruby, Pokemon Sapphire, and play through with Breloom, or like in the case of a fan game or a ROM hack where it's like Pokemon Uranium was designed to basically be another Pokemon game with all of the branding and materials and Pokemon and moves of a Pokemon game. They were designed specifically as effectively tributes or adaptations of those things, but Palworld really isn't that. It does look a lot like that. It does look a lot similar to stuff from Pokemon, but I feel like in this case, you really could make the argument that this is distinct and that they're, again, absolutely not a lawyer. And I'd love to hear people who know IP law more than I do, which isn't saying a whole lot, to feel free to share their thoughts. scandalsgamespodcast@gmail.com. And so I'm going to be honest, I really thought Nintendo was going to look the other way on this one. Again, Nintendo is a bit extra when it comes to their legal response, but they don't usually send out the lawyers unless it's a pretty blatant infringement of their IP and that it gets a lot of mainstream attention. And so like there's still, like, for example, there's still Pokemon ROM hacks and fan games that exist now, and Nintendo doesn't go at them, but like Uranium back in 2016, they got a lot of mainstream attention. They went viral effectively, and that got them on Nintendo's radar, and then Nintendo sent the lawyers. And so like, if you're a big ROM hosting site sharing Nintendo games or a content creator showing off modded Nintendo games, or if you're making a fan game like Uranium that ends up going viral, then chances are you might get a cease and desist. And on top of that, based on their past history, Nintendo generally go at content creators for the likes of fan games and ROM hacks around the time they come out. So like, that's what they did with Uranium. It's what they did with AM2R, which was the fan adaptation of Metroid 2, The Return of Samus, which both got cease and desist orders from Nintendo back in 2016. Again, for more on that, check out our previous episodes. However, in those cases, there was a direct, explicit link to a Nintendo-owned IP. A fan game of a Nintendo brand, a modified ROM of a retail game sold by Nintendo, and so on. But Palworld isn't that. It's an original IP that just so happens to involve capturing and battling with cartoonish monsters. And there's a long history of games with a similar premise that aren't Pokemon games, some of which go further back than the release of the original Pokemon games in 1996. So, for example, in 1994, Enix released a game called Robotrek. Has anybody heard of this game? This is kind of a deep cut. So Robotrek, I mostly wanted to use this as an excuse to mention Robotrek, because I've played this game on and off for many years now, where I started and then I don't finish it. So Robotrek, it was a Super NES RPG. It's known in Japan as Slapstick, and developed by Quintet, who also made Illusion of Gaia and the ActRaiser series, if you know those games. Robotrek follows a boy inventor who builds robots that do turn-based battles, where they are tossed into a battlefield out of vaguely similar-looking round red and white capsules. And the whole premise of that game is you can build up to 3 robots that, as your character levels up, they learn how to invent new things, and so they can build new weapons on their robots. Like, they can improve their movement, they can improve their durability, they can give them things like lasers and axes and swords and things like that. It's a cute, quirky little RPG. And of course, there are other games that have had that premise. For example, there was Metabots and Digimon, and all that's to say that that concept of capturing or acquiring creatures and having them battle each other is not unique to Pokemon. There's another, for example, there's another Japanese series called Telefang, which is basically like that, with the exception that you call the monsters on the phone. It's a cute little game. There actually was speaking of Pokemon ROM hacks, there was a game that was put out called Pokemon Jade, which was a fan translation of Telefang, where they just put a Pokemon branding on it. But like, on top of that, some have argued that Palworld, which is a game where you capture and battle monsters, where they can both kill each other with guns and toil away for resources in forced labor camps, is a parody of Pokemon, taking the series to kind of that furthest, darkest conclusion. I think we all joke about that the game is, that we are basically capturing these monsters and forcing them to fight for our amusement. And so it could be argued that this is a parody of that game, which is protected under copyright law. This is not an original idea to me. I recommend you check out the YouTuber Moon Channel, channel who did a whole video on the battle between Nintendo and Palworld and talked about arguing Palworld was a parody and would not necessarily in that case be subject to a copyright strike, for example. All that said, I thought that when Nintendo took no action after the game entered early access in January, that Pocket Pair would never hear from them. However, that changed on September the 18th, 2024, when Nintendo announced a lawsuit against the makers of Palworld. And what's interesting about this lawsuit is that from a legal standpoint, Nintendo didn't take issue with Palworld for its pals too closely resembling their mons. Instead, Nintendo sued Pocket Pair for patent infringement. Pocket Pair revealed the details of the suit on their company website on November the 8th. And according to the Palworld team, Nintendo sued for the infringement of 3 of their patents. The patents in question had been recently filed by Nintendo in Japan and related to the mechanics of aiming a throwing ball in a game environment, as well as riding on characters in a video game. So stuff that they were doing in Palworld that you could also do in like games like Pokemon Scarlet, Pokemon Violet, Pokemon Legends Arceus kind of stuff.
Well, you said recently, how recently?
How recently they filed them?
Yeah, those patents.
I'll double check. I'm pretty sure they filed them within the last year or so.
Yeah, I guess what I'm wondering is, were they doing this as sort of laying groundwork for a sound lawsuit? You know what I mean? Or did it coincide? You may not know that.
I'm not a lawyer, but I would not be shocked if what they did is they filed the patent on those things, citing that they had been using these in the past, and then use that as a legal grounds for a suit. I would not be shocked by that.
Sorry, are they again? Is it that Nintendo can do these things in any Nintendo games, or Nintendo can do these things and they can only happen in Pokemon games?
So Nintendo has patented it. They didn't say specifically that they had to happen in a Pokemon game, but that they had the idea of this. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, you said a character riding another character in the game was the second one?
Yes.
Seems very general. Does no one ride anyone else in Helldivers? Serious question, I've never played.
You have to be in a mech, but it can happen.
I think Helldivers would be a much improved game if players could ride each other during the games.
Yeah, they piggyback.
Whee!
Piggyback rides.
It's my turn, damn it!
So you can actually jump on top of your friend's mech if they're in a mech, and you can somehow figure out a way to get on top of the hill, and you can just sort of lay there and do stuff. That's pretty cool. But other than that, you're right. No chicken fight style.
That would be fun. Arrowhead, you listening? I put a link in the chat to an article on the suit by The Verge, and they have links to the patents. I'm not an expert on patent law, and they're in Japanese, So according to Pocket Pair's announcement, Nintendo demanded 5 million yen, which translates to about $32,000, for each infringed patent, plus damages, as well as an injunction against Palworld that would effectively see the game's cancellation. Now, I'm neither a lawyer nor an expert in Japanese patent law, and again, I recommend Moon Channel's video on this suit because they have a really fascinating legal perspective on this. Basically, and bearing in mind, their video came out on October the 29th, 2024, so it's before the details were revealed. And at the time, Moon Channel speculated that this was actually a kind of proxy war between Nintendo and Sony, because Sony's the publisher of Palworld, and that this was kind of a battle for supremacy between Nintendo and Sony that's been going back to the 1990s with their failed deal over the Nintendo PlayStation. It's fascinating. It's, again, way out of my wheelhouse. And this is also just in the absolute earliest stages of this story. So this might be an episode somewhere down the line, but this is basically all we know right now on this one. All right, I got one last one, and this one is a doozy. This one's a fun one to end on. Anyone else have any other thoughts on this whole Palworld thing?
Why do you think it sounds like you were thinking, Kevin, that Nintendo would just have looked the other way on this one. Why do you think they didn't?
I don't know. Again, totally not a legal expert. I don't know.
Yeah,
Again,
I think it's not so you don't have to be a legal. I'm not asking like legally. It's just like, are there factors that tend to matter more to Nintendo in your opinion, your expert opinion of like, I don't know, I'm making something up. If it's like this is getting a lot of attention online, a lot of positive attention, or was it perhaps like we don't want people to have, the image of Pokemon with guns, or I don't know, some other third thing. I don't know.
That's a good question. I think a bunch of it involves, I don't know the nuance of how Japanese businesses work. And so I don't know if there's something, a kind of a larger thing going on that is common among Japanese corporations that they are reacting to.
Is it fair to consider Nintendo, while it is based in Japan, an international business more than a Japanese business, or is there perhaps something that's specifically culturally relevant about the fact that they're based in Japan for this?
I mean, the reason I bring that up is because they did file the suit specifically in Japan,
Mm-hmm.
and Pocket Pair is a Japanese company.
Okay.
So maybe there's something going on there. But like again, I thought if they were going to sue Pocket Pair, again, this is assuming if it was a copyright infringement thing, they probably would have done it around the time when the game went viral.
Mm.
And so it's just weird to think that they took them that. And again, bearing in mind that would have been, say, a cease and desist order, but I don't think they had a lot of, again, not a legal expert, but I don't think they had a lot of grounds for a cease and desist. And maybe it's like, well, this is pretty close to Pokemon. People are making it could be, again, thinking about this, like the biggest term that I heard people describe Palworld when the first trailers went viral was they called it Pokemon with guns. And there might have been some concern about that close of a brand association between Palworld and Pokemon that maybe Nintendo maybe thought that this is creating a negative association for our brand, that it's somehow harmful for our brand. And maybe, again, this is total speculation. Maybe they didn't think that that they didn't have a strong ground to do, for example, C&D, that maybe they could then get them this way. This is infringing on the whole capture mechanic. Their Pal Balls or Pal Spheres, whatever they call them, it's pretty much like a Pokeball. And a lot of people have made that
Oh yeah, yeah.
comparison.
There's definitely some. So I'm not saying that they don't have a case. They might. Well, I think
Yeah,
I was just curious because you had mentioned that there had been an assumption that perhaps they'd look the other way, but they didn't. So
that's maybe my thought. Yeah, this one's a weird one. I can't wait to hear more information about this. This is one of those things. I mean, these kind of legal battles that can go on for years. So it might be a while before we really know anything about this. But I saved what I hope is the best for last. This is also a Pokemon related one. And this was, dude, boy howdy, this is weird. This is a real weird one. It was not the only Pokemon related scandal to come up last year. And on October the 10th, 2024, Game Freak, the company responsible for Pokemon, the development team behind the mainline Pokemon games, announced that they had been the victim of a massive data breach in which hackers obtained internal records, including personal information for 2,606 current and former employees. Later that weekend, CentroLeaks, a group that describes themselves on their X profiles, quote, the biggest source of Pokemon leaks, rumors, and news, end quote, started sharing details allegedly from the Game Freak data leak. The breach, which CentroLeaks dubbed the Terra Leak, which is a reference to an earlier Nintendo data breach back in 2020 that was called the Giga Leak, so this is the Terra Leak, included a payday, that's a Pokemon move, for fans that included hitherto unseen concept art from both earlier Pokemon games and the anime, the source code for the Pokemon DS games Heart Gold, Soul Silver, Black, and White, and references to a sequel to the movie Pokemon Detective Pikachu. Also included in the Terra Leak were information related to a live-action movie internally called Game Boy, and details allegedly connected to the console successor to the Nintendo Switch, making it just one of a million upteenth bazillion leaks of the Nintendo Switch 2, which that will probably be something we talk about if we're recapping this next year for 2025, just because there's been so many things about this or that thing is leaking the Switch 2. But among the other tantalizing materials were a set of design documents allegedly fleshing out the lore of the world of Pokemon, like the background lore prior to the game about the world itself. And they're written in the style of mythological folktales, which, if legitimate, deviate from the generally family-friendly model of the Pokemon brand in some significant ways. So buckle up, folks, it's gonna get weird. In one alleged story titled Original Sin, based on the current Pokemon world, a group of women capture and kill Slay Kings for fun. Is anyone familiar with a Slay King? There's going to be some images I'm going to have to show. Slackoth and Slay King are going to factor into this story I'm going to tell you.
is that a Pokemon?
They're Pokemon, yeah.
Okay.
Let me bring up. Okay, so this fellow here, this is a Slakoth, and its final evolution, Slay King.
Okay.
They're going to factor into this. Okay, so picture that in your head right now. So in this story, Original Sin based on the current Pokemon world, a group of women capture and kill Slay Kings for fun until one of them is captured by a band of Slakoths and Vigoroths. Vigoroth is the mid-stage evolution of this, who impregnate the woman, who in turn gives birth to a Slakoth, who is then killed by her friends.
I mean, I'm certain it's not the worst thing online.
I'm posting the link to the full story that was dropped on CentroLeaks on the 13th of October, 2024.
This is the story about the story?
This is the story that I just recounted to you. This is the story itself.
Okay, I'm not clicking that.
There are a lot in that vein. For example, in another, I'm going to introduce you to other Pokemon, Octillery and Ursaring. And Octillery is basically a big old red and yellow octopus who looks like this. And then The other character in this is Ursa Ring. You know Ursa Ring, Kate.
Oh, Teddy Ursa,
That's what
yeah.
Teddy Ursa evolves into. It's just a big old bear with a big old circle on his tummy. And so, in this other story titled "The Collapse of Culture and Relationships," a young man who is the product of a dude having relations with an octillery fights an Ursa Ring, and the two end up strangling each other to death.
Given where the other story was going when you brought up a tentacled monster, I was a little bit more worried. So this is like, it's fine.
It is Japan, after all.
I mean, well, horny Pokemon stories, violent Pokemon stories, these are fan fiction, right?
They read like it, don't they? I will say, cards on the table. No one has confirmed whether or not these are actually real. This was allegedly part of the leak, and a lot of this, from what I've read, is like these are loosely based on Japanese folklore, and they're just basically Pokemon inserted on top of them. So who knows if any of this is actually things that were framing people when they were making the silly little game where we capture and befriend Pikachu and Bulbasaur and all of them. And it's still another, I'm going to introduce you another Pokemon, Typhlosion, one of my favorite Pokemon. Typhlosion is the second generation fire starter who looks like this, who evolves from Cyndaquil.
Kevin, don't you have a little action figure of that one? That one looks familiar.
I have one of Cyndaquil.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
The base level of
The baby.
Typhlosion.
Okay.
Yeah. In this one. So in this one, a Typhlosion disguises himself as a human man, kidnaps and drugs a girl, takes her as his bride, eventually having a half human, half Typhlosion child with her. And I'm detecting a bit of a pattern in these stories. Any thoughts on this?
Well, what we saw, I did eventually click on that link. You see an image of text that has been typed out. Like, I could do that and post it online and say, look, I mean, I guess like if this is intended for a Pokemon game, which is that's the thing, right? Like allegedly this is something that was bound for a Pokemon game, yes?
I think it's more like lore, like a lore Bible kind of thing, where like this is things to think about in the background of this game.
Right. So I guess like you're not actually going to play as any of those characters, but it's like there's going to be stuff that happened as a result of it. I guess I'm wondering like how seriously to take it when that's where you got to it. I'm reminded of, for instance, when people ultimately realized what was up with Cubone, about like the skull on his face. It's like, oh, that's his dead mother's skull. Like that's upsetting, but it's like that was in the games and that was confirmed in various official pieces of Nintendo lore literature. I guess I'm just wondering, like, I wouldn't take this seriously delivered in this way. I'd be like, that's weird. Some weirdo typed something out and put it on the internet and claimed it's part of Pokemon lore.
Hmm.
And I could absolutely be missing something. Like, what made it seem more legitimate than just some weirdo saying something on the internet?
My understanding is Central Leaks carries a bit of weight in these kinds of communities. The source lends some authenticity to it.
I see.
I have not, I have not critically looked into whether or not these things are real.
Right.
Yeah, so I'll put in the link in the chat. This is a full compilation of all the myths as well as details on the Terra Leak in general. It's at a site called PokeOS.com. This particular site has where all of these alleged lore dumps are dropped right now. And to be clear, I think you're right to be skeptical, Kate. I think that you got to take these with huge lumps of salt for a number of reasons. For one, Game Freak has made no statements confirming or denying their legitimacy. Like, they did report on the leak. The only thing they said about the leak was that employees' personal information was compromised in the data breach.
And it was an unsecured Discord server that was at the heart of the leak. Was that correct?
I think you're right. I think it was someone clicked a bad link in a Discord or something.
It's often stuff like that, honestly, that leads to stuff like this.
I'm reminded when we talked about crypto games, and what was it? Axie Infinity. Axie Infinity, their servers got hacked because a bunch of hackers tricked one of their programmers into doing a job interview and sent them a PDF of a job offer, which then got a bunch of their security keys.
I mean, it's phishing scams in general. I'm sure we all get them all the time. I get them all the time at work. Sometimes it seems like it's an email coming from the CEO or something like that. And in my experience, it's often the lower effort stuff as the method of ingress. And of course, once they're in, they can do more damage. Phil, what are your thoughts?
No, everything you said was right on the money.
But my boss had me get all of these Amazon gift cards, and I've got to just take pictures of them and send them. That's on the up and up, right?
Yeah, that seems legit.
All right, so yeah, Game Freak made no statements about this. Reportedly, the stories presented online are also AI-generated English translations from the original Japanese. So it's very possible that a bunch is being lost in translation. I don't know if the original Japanese, if these were original, has been leaked too. So we have these translations to go on. There might be nuance laws. And there's plenty of incentive for folks to create, quote-unquote official lore stories and attribute them to the Terra Leak. In my opinion, it's just as likely these were pulled from the depths of DeviantArt as from Game Freak's offices in Tokyo. So salacious, yes. Shocking, yes. Nintendo backed or created, I don't know. But that being said, the shocking and salacious accounts from these stories attracted a bunch of online discourse, inspiring all sorts of reactions, memes, and related media. The Typhlosion story in particular went especially viral, with tons of reactions and fan art shared online of the uncomfortable activities of the fully evolved Gen 2 Firestarter, attracting tens of thousands of engagements online. As a result of that, in certain circles in the Pokemon community, being a fan of Typhlosion now carries a little bit more baggage than it did a few months ago. And those were just a few of the stories that were bouncing around during 2024. We started by talking about Helldivers, and we ended it in a very strange Pokemon place. So with that, final thoughts on our recap of 2024.
It was a pretty democratic year.
Not great for democracy.
Pretty fascist year.
Definitely an interesting year to look back upon. Is Helldivers still going as strong as it was?
Oh, yeah, I would say with the new faction that came in, the peak player count on a weekly basis is over 100,000 people, which is really good. At its depths, it was down to like 30,000 people. So I would say it's going well. Oh, also today is the 1 year anniversary of Helldivers, and everybody who signs in is supposed to get a free anniversary suit of armor. And everybody on Steam has signed in and gotten theirs, but nobody on PlayStation can because the PlayStation Network is down. The Monster Hunter Wild second beta is also going on this weekend, and nobody can download it on PlayStation because PlayStation Network is down.
Oh, wow.
I'm looking up to see if it's still down.
Kevin knows that I'm a completionist. Even if I don't like the new armor set, I still have to have it.
So here's an article by Chris Plant of Polygon that dropped 2 hours ago. The headline is, PlayStation Network is still down and Sony doesn't have an answer yet.
Apparently, the last time it was down at length, it was down for 24 days.
Yeah. Oh, we're going to talk about that. That was in 2011. So that was a massive data breach. I remember when it happened, and the story is really complicated and really weird. That's why I'm going to do an episode, because actually it's a really fun story.
Wow. And what's frustrating is this is a network people pay for. I mean, the Steam network is essentially free, right? And that's up. And the PlayStation network, we all pay an arm and a leg for, and that sucks.
Yeah. As far as I know right now, this article dropped 2 hours ago. I have not booted up my PS5 since this morning. As far as we know right now, the PSN is still down. Well, if and when it goes back up, I may have to start diving again.
Yeah, they buffed the ballistic shield, and there are more melee options now. You can fight with a one-handed hatchet.
Oh, nice.
I don't know what that's going to do against a giant quadrupedal robot, but you have one. You also have access to a shovel, which you can pick up on the map. You can dig pits with it, and you can either hide in it for cover, or you can throw a sentry in it and do some novel stuff with it. And you can also use it to defend yourself if you need to.
That's awesome. How are the Illumites?
They're good. So like it's a zombie apocalypse trope. So it's a little horrifying that the hordes coming at you are former citizens, but there's a very fascist government spin on that, which I think is a valuable takeaway. It's fun. They come in on spaceships and you can shoot down the spaceships, and you play in an urban environment. And you run around, and there are like neon signs for storefronts that used to be there, and there are fun jokes in those. And they give you a Hummer that 4 other Helldivers can ride around in and do some really dangerous and ill-advised stuff in. But you could also like hang out of the Humvee and like throw grenades and stuff and throw stratagems. It's really kind of fun.
Nice. That reminds me of like the Warthog in Halo, where you can have a bunch of people jump on it and drive around.
Yeah, I think it's an homage to that. It is pretty fun.
That's cool. Yeah, I may have to do that if, again, get your act together, Sony. And that will do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. If you like what we're doing and want to help the show, subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. If you want to learn more, check out our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com, where I publish the show notes and the sources for every episode. Our theme music is Occam Seek Me by Seek Knowledge via the Free Music Archive, used under a CC BY NCSA 3.0 US license. If you have a question, comment, or idea for a topic for a future episode, email us at scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, I'm Kevin Impellizeri.
I'm Phil.
I'm Kate.
I'm Elford.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next Scandal. Subscribe to Fat Roll Gaming on YouTube and listen to So We Were Talking About Beast Wars wherever you get your podcasts.